And this is part 2 of an interview in progress. The Muslim world now, especially with Libya, Al-Qaeda. I'd like to get your opinion on Al-Qaeda. What is Al-Qaeda in reality? Is it really just a CIA database, or are they really Islamic jihadists? Can you explain to our listeners a little bit, especially with Libya and Syria, the differences, since you're an expert, between Sunnis and Shia and Salafists and all the groups that make up the Muslim world?
Okay, well, Al-Qaeda, it means a database, and it did refer to a CIA database of jihadis who were recruited from around the world to go fight in Afghanistan during the Afghanistan war against the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And the CIA and its Saudi and Pakistani and other allies were working, with a certain type of Muslim. And in particular, I think, especially in Saudi Arabia, they were dealing with people whose style of Islam is what has been variously referred to as Salafi or Wahhabi. Mm-hmm. And extreme elements of those people are now being referred to as Takfiris. And all of these words, Takfiri, Wahhabi in particular, these refer to a very extreme brand of Islam, or some would say a deviation from Islam. It goes back historically to the reformer Abdul Wahhab about 300 years ago. And that brand of Islam has always, the good side of it is it opposes corruption. The problem is that it basically says everybody who doesn't think the way we do is corrupt, and so we should go out and kill them. So these Wahhabis did engage in a lot of massacres of Shia and Sufi Muslims and made an alliance with the House of Saud about the beginning of the 19th century. And the British encouraged that alliance. And the House of Saud and its kind of Wahhabi extremists then became a thorn in the side of the Ottoman Empire, and the British used this extremist wing to bring down the Ottoman Empire. And the most famous episode of this is when the British secret agent T.E. Lawrence was sent over to Arabia to open up a new front against the Ottoman Turks.
I'm sorry, pause for a minute. This was the same one that they made the film Lawrence of Arabia, right?
That's right, yeah.
And just a comment, a sad note that Peter O'Toole, passed away not long ago. But
I'm sorry to hear that.
Go ahead.
Lawrence of Arabia, may have been, was a very complex person, but he was a British secret agent, and his job was to rally these extremist kind of Wahhabi Arabian Muslims against the Ottoman Empire and to help bring down that empire. And that effort, of course, succeeded. Post-World War I, the Europeans completely took over the Ottoman Empire and basically owned the entire Islamic world at that point. And I don't think that this alliance of Western imperialism and this extremist, Wahhabi brand of Islam that's been working with the wealthy Ibn Saud family has ever really stopped. And so when they created Al-Qaeda, the CIA needs a force to try to give Russia its Vietnam, as Brzezinski said at the time. Mm-hmm. They went through their Saudi allies, and they found all of these Wahhabi extremists who were, all hyped up and ready to go, fight for Islam against the infidels, and that was kind of how Al-Qaeda was set up. But I think it was set up partly as a strategy. As I said, Bernard Lewis, the grand strategist of British Zionist Orientalism, came up with this notion of creating a radical Muslim group to destabilize the Islamic world in the same way that the Ismaili assassins had destabilized the Islamic world in the Middle Ages. That, I think, was the concept for Al-Qaeda. Lewis was saying that from the time of his dissertation in 1950. So when they created Al-Qaeda in 1979 or so, they were following this model, I believe, of creating a radical and destabilizing force in the Islamic world. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they turned to the usual Western assets, the Ibn Saud family and their extremist Wahhabi religious friends. So that's where Al-Qaeda came from. Now, there really are people, who embrace that particular brand of or deviation from Islam. And in that sense, it's quote-unquote real. But it is heavily manipulated by Western imperialism and Zionism, which is the part of Western imperialism that is most concerned with the Middle East.
Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, it's the same thing. I think they were created, in 1917 by MI6. Can you tell us about them? How are they similar to or working with Al-Qaeda, etc.?
I'm actually a bit less conspiratorial about the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
In that, I think that they had some contact with the British, but if you look at what their program is, it's not as obvious that it's just purely created to manipulate Islam on behalf of imperialism. On the contrary, its ostensible program is to unite Muslims against imperialism and to raise the intellectual, educational, cultural level of Muslims as well as the level of Muslim piety to do that. So that's the ostensible mission of the Muslim Brotherhood, which I think is actually a fairly reputable and defensible mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in this case, the Brotherhood, like all other groups, gets approached, infiltrated, and steered by these intelligence agencies and the forces of empire. And of course, that has happened. For a long time, they were getting support against nationalism in the Arab world, which was at that time seen as the big threat to imperialism and Zionism. Mm-hmm. Nasser of Egypt was the biggest threat. And so to try to counter him, the Western imperialists and the Zionists helped the Muslim Brotherhood to create a counterforce in the same way that they helped Hamas against Israel, because, of course, at that time, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was this sort of secular nationalist group, and they wanted a counterweight. So that's why the Brotherhood has gotten Western support over the years. But I don't think there's anything really inherent in its approach that is conducive to imperialism. It's just that it's been infiltrated and steered, and it's become dependent on Saudi oil money and Gulf oil money like everybody else. That's the whole problem with everything in Islam these days is main money out there is coming from these wealthy reactionary Gulf petro sheiks, and those guys are in bed with the imperialists and the Zionists. So no matter what kind of Muslim group you have, if you want some money to do anything, that's the most obvious source. And naturally, those guys are out there just buying everybody up. And the Muslim Brotherhood has had that problem as well. When they won elections in Egypt recently, in these landslides, in real, genuine democratic elections, they were, I think, set up to fail in part by their Saudi sponsors. The Saudis and other Gulf people, Qataris and others, gave them money and then kind of tried to steer their policy towards supporting the rebellion in Syria and doing other stupid things, being sectarian.
Were you aware they were receiving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars from the U.S. government as well?
Yeah, the U.S. government has been propping up the Egypt government forever. Now, the main U.S. recipient of funds in Egypt is the military, which is the real government in Egypt, always has been, and it works very tightly with Israel as well. And the military was very uncomfortable with the Muslim Brotherhood coming to power, which is, of course, why they overthrew it with
Sure.
With 100% blessings of the Israelis, who actually were behind the coup, and the 70% blessings of the Americans, who were a little bit skeptical.
I see. So you wouldn't characterize, just real quick, you wouldn't characterize the Muslim Brotherhood as an extremist organization?
Not as an organization, no. I think there are extremist tendencies in the Brotherhood. I think that the people who give them money are often fostering extremist tendencies, and certainly the Brotherhood in Syria has become extremist. And that's the product of the specific history of Syria, where there's been this clash between the Brotherhood-linked forces and the government that's been going on forever. And that's created a radical and extremist kind of attitude among the Brotherhood in Syria, and they were just, set up to be led into this trap to create the Syrian civil war, destabilize Syria on behalf of the Zionists. But the Brotherhood itself, as a larger, organization, is, I don't think, extremist at all. Look at Tariq Ramadan, one of the leading intellectuals affiliated with the Brotherhood. He's anything but extremist, and the same is with a lot of other Muslim Brotherhood people as well.
Now, you just talked about Syria, the current situation. Who do you think was behind the Syrian chemical weapons attack? You just mentioned Israel in connection with Syria. Why would Israel want Syria pretty much devastated and destroyed? What's your take on Syria, please, sir?
I think that the destabilization of Syria was planned well in advance, and the Arab Spring provided a good opportunity to launch demonstrations that could then be used as a pretext to create escalating violence, often through false flag incidents. It appears that as the demonstrations broke out in Syria, that some destabilizing professionals went in there and started shooting. They would shoot at both sides. People on rooftops would shoot at the demonstrators who thought it was the police. Somebody would shoot at the police and they would think it was the demonstrators. And this created escalating violence. And I think that was all part of a plan to create this civil war that has ripped Syria apart. And this is primarily in the interest of the Israelis.
I don't know. I wouldn't call it a civil war because, even Assad himself said there's no civil war in Syria because all the fighters are imported jihadists.
I think there's an element of civil war, but it's actually, as you say, in a sense, it's more of an invasion of Syria by the Saudis and these other folks who were sending in mercenaries, emptying their jails. But I don't think we should go so far as to deny that there has been a split in Syria. There are people in Syria who have felt oppressed and excluded.
Oh, sure.
There were real demonstrations, and this was all taken advantage of by these forces of destabilization. It wasn't just created out of whole cloth.
Oh, sure. But then again, I think those were stoked and exaggerated and encouraged, like what's going on in Ukraine right now. Anyway.
This was part of, 9/11 was, as I said, the blueprint was PNAC, Rebuilding American Defenses, which was a rewrite of the clean break document prepared for Netanyahu by the same mostly American Jewish Zionist neoconservatives. And what those guys said was we need a clean break from the previous geostrategic situation. We need to essentially have regime change in all these independent Middle Eastern countries that don't like Israel. So that's what they've done. They invaded Iraq. They threw out that anti-Israeli Saddam government. They trashed Libya. They hijacked the Arab Spring. They bogged down in Iraq, so they couldn't do the whole 9 yards of the 7 countries in 5 years they were planning. So then they went to Plan B, which was to use the Arab Spring, which everybody knew was inevitable, that at some point the people were going to start rising up against these hereditary autocracies. Mm-hmm. And once that broke out, then they steered it to destabilize the countries that were independent enough to not take orders from the Americans and the Israelis. And so they went after Libya first and wiped out Libya. Well, they split up Sudan, of course, they split up Somalia, and then they went after Syria. And in Syria, I think by now, everybody has kind of figured out what they're up to, and in particularly, Russia and Iran, and to a lesser extent China, all said, okay, that's enough of these regime changes. We're not going to allow, American bombers to destroy Syria the way they just destroyed Libya. So we're kind of at this stalemate situation now, and I think the American realists are rethinking everything and wondering whether it wouldn't make more sense to try to achieve their objectives in a more reasonable and less bloody way.
The current situation in Libya, now it seems like the tribes are starting to take some power away from the Al-Qaeda and the radical elements that have pretty much taken over the country. Are you aware of what's going on there right now? Or?
I think Libya has been intentionally destabilized and smashed into pieces. That was what the whole purpose of the operation really was. Mm-hmm. And I think that the people that planned it knew this. We were told by these neoconservatives that if we invade countries like Iraq, they'll greet us with flowers, and everybody will unite and form a nice American-style democracy and become strong supporters of Israel. Yeah. This is what Wolfowitz told us was coming. And, Wolfowitz has something like a 180 IQ, and he can't possibly be stupid enough to actually believe that stuff. Mm-hmm. I think these guys know that what they're really doing is just smashing these countries to pieces so that, they're reducing the Israel enemies list. And so Libya is in this kind of chaotic situation of various tribes and their militias and these Al-Qaeda forces supported by Saudis and other, extremists and then some people who will take money and orders from the Americans, and it's all a big mess. Mm-hmm. Compared to all of these guys, Gaddafi was pretty much of a saint.
Well, sure, Libya was, it was the richest country in Africa, and everyone I've ever talked to who lived there before the invasion, they said that people lived fairly well there. There was peace, there was no inter-ethnic strife. As with Iraq, there was no Sunni-Shia hatred. The Sunni and the Shia, they would intermarry and they would be friends and everything was normal.
Yeah, I agree. It's too bad because, there were Libyans in eastern Libya in particular who were, I think, victimized by propaganda that led them to, you understand how it can happen naturally, too, that people who have a somewhat different outlook from the government end up conflict with the government, and the Libyan government could be pretty brutal with opponents at times, and so that then creates more opposition. I knew Libyan exiles here in the U.S. who were not at all happy with Gaddafi, and they had people in their families that had been mistreated. There were disaffected people there, but overall, I think it was functioning fairly well. It was also ripe for reform. It would have been pretty easy to hold Libya together and have it become even more stable, prosperous, and less oppressive. But that's not what the powers that be wanted. They just wanted to destroy it and make an example of Gaddafi, who had this audacity to stand up against the West.
That was the end of part 2 of an interview with Dr. Kevin Barrett, a doctor in Arabic and Islamic studies and the owner and manager of truthjihad.com. He's also a member of the Scientific Professionals Investigating 9/11. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you the best wherever you may be.